So welcome to the closing panel of our workshop. It's been a great 2 days so far. I only wanted to briefly announce the translation, and I have done that, and we're recording the session, and I think Zainab is coming in just now, perfect timing. So welcome again. Let me just introduce the host of the session to you, and then hand right over. So we are very glad, dear Sarah, that you're hosting the session. Sarah Markiewicz is an expert for religion, dialogue, and peace building, working at the intersection between academia and development, which makes her the perfect host, obviously. And she began her career at Humboldt-Universität in Berlin, but she has also moved on in 2019 to join the German faith-based organization Malteser International to become a social cohesion advisor in Iraq for a major program that we heard about already, called the Nineveh Return Program. And again, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here with us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Eckhard, for the nice introduction. So a big welcome to all of you. Assalamu alaikum, b'khair bin. It has been a very exciting few days, and for all those joining from Iraq who are celebrating Nowruz, I want to thank you for taking time out of your holiday also to be here with us. The final panel has a rather big goal, which is to summarize key findings from the preceding workshop, contextualize main insights from the panelists' perspectives, and get different viewpoints and backgrounds. So that's quite a large undertaking. We've been very lucky to get some very important and very diverse experts today. I'm going to introduce them, and then we have a broad range of topics that I'm going to ask for their expertise on. And at the end of this panel, there will be an opportunity for you to be able to ask your questions. The request is that you save your questions to the end. You can write them in the chat as well. And we will try our best to get to as many as possible. So we have 4 panelists with us today, but I think maybe one of them has not been able to join yet. There have been some connection problems in Iraq, so we ask for your patience and understanding there, as well as if our panelists should have any interruptions during the panel. So our first panelist, it is my great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Martin Huth. Martin Huth is a German diplomat who has been serving as ambassador and head of delegation of the European Union to Iraq since 2019. Ambassador Huth joined the German diplomatic service in 1991 and served at the German embassy in Yemen from 1992 to 95, and then until 1997 in the embassy in Iran. After further assignments at the headquarters of the German Foreign Office, he became an advisor at the German Permanent Mission to the United Nations in Geneva, and later deputy head of mission in Beirut, Lebanon. In 2011, while Germany was a member of the United Nations Security Council, Ambassador Huth served as a legal advisor to the German Permanent Mission to the United Nations in New York. And between 2013 and 2015, he was head of the Human Rights Division at the Federal Foreign Office in Berlin. From 2015 to 2018, Martin Huth served as the German ambassador to Lebanon. He holds a degree in law and speaks German, English, Arabic, Farsi, and French. So quite an impressive record there. Ambassador Huth, it's such a pleasure to have you with us, and we look forward to your insights on this panel. Our second panelist is Zainab Qassim. Zainab is an organizational development professional and peacebuilding practitioner, and one of the founders of the Iraqi consultancy Peace Paradigms organization, where she is the senior organizational development advisor. She is also an acting member of the Iraqi Al-Amal organization. Previously, she was head of the Peacebuilding Approach Unit at the GIZ, Networks Manager of Sanad for Peacebuilding, and Advocacy Manager with Mercy Corps. Through this experience, she established and sustained a trusted network of civil society activists key community leaders, governmental actors, international and local NGOs and UN agencies, through which she managed to build a comprehensive understanding of Iraqi civil society, community engagement, as well as the history of civil participation movements and their challenges. She holds a BA in computer science and programming from the College for Economic Science of Baghdad University. Welcome, Zainab. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Our third panelist is Stefan Kleisnicza. Stefan is an experienced expert in relief and development with a distinguished international career of more than 3 decades. He has been responsible for projects all over the world and traveled extensively, but in the region only to Iraq, Lebanon, Israel, and Palestine. He has worked, amongst others, for World Vision and planned and started in 2018 the Nineveh Return Program for Malteser International, and in that context, he visited Iraq regularly. Malteser International is the international relief agency of the Sovereign Order of Malta with headquarters in Rome. By profession, he is an economist with a focus on development economics, and his role as policy director of Malteser International, he has established working relationships with the Humboldt-Universität and other research institutions. In this role, he is also advising on a regular basis the government of the Order of Malta on issues pertaining to relief, development, and the linkages to faith-based actors. And Ahmed Rifat, I'm unsure if he's been able to connect so far, but I definitely want to introduce him in case he comes a little later. Ahmed has the double role of being the livelihoods coordinator and the monitoring and evaluation coordinator with Malteser International in Iraq. He joined Malteser International in 2019 at the beginning of the Nineveh Return Program, focusing on return to areas of origin for minorities displaced by ISIS. Ahmed has over 16 years experience working in the humanitarian and development sector in Iraq and has worked across the whole country. He also has experience in policy, social cohesion, and emergency relief. He was recently awarded a Medal of Engagement by Malteser International in recognition of his important contribution to the work of Malteser International in Iraq. So we have a very diverse panel today. On the one hand, we have Ambassador Huth, who's a representative of the diplomatic and political channels, Zainab Qassim, who is from Iraq and is a co-founder of a local organization consultancy, Ahmed Rifat, also from Iraq, working for a Christian faith-based organization, and Stefan Kleisnicza of Malteser International, based in Cologne, working on policy. So welcome to you all today. I think the first round, it's just very important that we get to know you a little bit. So I would like to ask you to introduce a little bit about your work and how you engage with religious communities in your work. Zainab, I'd ask you to begin for us.
Thank you, Sarah. It's really a privilege and an honor to join such a really honorable group, and with our talented, I wouldn't say audience, but I would say the community who are listening now. With our work, I think it's database engagement. I wouldn't say even like different religious group, but they defined the community themselves as their own choices of special religious. They see it, they made them unique as their own original background. And I think, for example, as a recent project we are working covering 11 districts of disputed territories. It's all about the diversity of different ethnics, different religious, and even different social background, which even very impressive with the heritage history-wise, with each group are bringing. And sometimes even you see that when the communities are not acknowledging that's history, it's one of the reasons that might create more division, and one of the reasons that they feel neglected, or they feel this shouldn't be at disputed territories because this is a special area. It's because the special, unique background each groups are bringing to that area. So I think it's even stopped to being identified as a minorities or as a components in for example, in Ninawa Plain, where like Entel Cave and Hamdaniya, they see now it's been mixed, the identity of their own religious background with the political implications, that each year by year they are bringing this to the area, with creating more undesirable reflection to their own identity, to their own choices, to their own lands, and to their own communities, which then they started to reflect what they've been facing. For example, the Christian are still facing the challenge of the immigration. The other communities or components, they are facing the challenge of like not being acknowledged yet as really a special religious in the map of the Iraqi religious diversity, legal-wise, constitutional-wise, and even community culture-wise. And sometimes like it's about accepting each other within the same geographical area, like Baha'is, and even till now, the Kaka'is, not to mention what the Yazidi component are facing. So sometimes they not define themselves by their religious, they define themselves about the history, what they've been suffering from, what they've been facing over centuries, and what they make them not only special but unique in positive way. Sometimes it's good to bring those communities together, and sometimes it's what makes others are really drifted away and avoid what potential social cohesion can bring them together. Our work is, I know like sometimes it's, well, locally wise, they see as a national consultancy firm doing a peace building consultation with different national and international communities is a bit weird. They are so stuck with the ideas that they need just to deal with an NGO. But sometimes when you say an organization, they accept you. You don't have to explain you are a firm, but it's a new concept, even like in the idea of the entrepreneur. So sometimes I just frame it, I say, okay, we are a company with the heart of an NGO. And then voila, I see a smile because now they get it. It's like, because the usual context and the usual culture is dealing with the NGO. Because when you explain even a company, like even today, when you explain a company, it's like in the checkpoints, I was heading to Tel Afar, and he says like, what does that mean? It's like exactly what you are doing. Are you a journalist? No. And then, are you a doctor? No. And then like you just say, I'm a consultant. And then it's even, you need to interpret what does it mean as the concept of the context itself. So I wouldn't say it as a challenge, because sometimes being unique, it's a privilege, and sometimes it's not. It's always how to drift. What has been challenging as an opportunity to drive through this. So I would say our work with the consultancy is always engaging with the diversity of such impressive background, historical background, religious background, and even what each one been through all over those journeys. And sometimes it's like, what we notice is that the differences that maybe different communities are still agreeing on against one difference is might to bring them together. And I think this is what happened post 2014. And I will stop here not to steal more time, and hope that is clear from my end. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Zainab. And I know that the organization, the Religious Communities for Sustainable Development Program, will be so pleased that you already talk about your transdisciplinary approach to peace building. I would like to ask Stefan Kleisnicza now to briefly introduce the kind of work he's doing and how it engages with religious communities.
Yes, thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everybody. For me, it's a big pleasure to be in this meeting, and with Malteser International, we are working all over the world in emergency situations. I personally have always been closely linked to working with faith-based organizations, and diving into the situation of Iraq and especially the Nineveh Plains it struck me as well in one of our conversations yesterday that while communities of different ethno-religious or faith backgrounds have been living close to each other for centuries, the understanding of what the other belief really is about is quite limited. So that had brought us to the concept of the question of religious literacy that to our understanding is one important aspect to be looked at in the future if we want to have a peaceful living together of the different ethno-religious groups, not only in Iraq, but I think in general, because what is an experience that we in Germany know very well is that the less engagement and relationship you have with other people or with other peoples, the easier it is to have wrong concepts and be manipulated in a very negative way. So for us, the question of building bridges, of bringing people together, of contributing to not only theoretical understanding, but to keep and develop personal linkages is something that is quite central to a lot of things we do. And in this context, the area of social cohesion that we have been working on in the Nineveh Return program is something that we are very intentional and very proud of. Just as a brief starter for the conversation.
Wonderful, thanks so much, Stefan. And working for an FBO, of course, you're right at the nexus between questions of religious communities and development. Now, Ambassador Huth, I'd like to ask you to introduce yourself, introduce the work that you do and how that engages with religious communities. You're still on mute, I think, for me. Or we have some more microphone fun to deal with. Okay. I can't hear you right now. You're unmuted from there, I see. You wanted to... No, he says he is unmuted. It's a microphone. The host should request me to unmute. Can the host do that?
Yes, one moment, please.
Good minute.
We should be able to hear everything.
Has he been unmuted?
Yes, he's unmuted all the time in my list of participants. I don't know what the problem is.
I guess it's the microphone. It's not from Zoom because here it states it's unmuted, or it's the internet connection.
Okay, what about now?
Yes, now.
Yes.
Okay, all right. The microphone asked me whether I should activate it. Sorry about this. Okay, very, very briefly, you introduced me already, Sarah. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure. And of course, as you have heard from my CV and my background, I'm of course a diplomat, and we have a very specific way of engaging. And when it comes to a country like Iraq, of course, one of the main tasks is, and this is just in the wake of being able to get to know the country and to meet those who matter and also leaders in society. You do, of course, engage with religious communities, most of all, or starting with religious leaders. and in a multi-confessional and multi-ethnic country like Iraq, of course, these are quite few, starting with the big confessions and then working your way down and trying as much as possible to engage with those of other communities as well. So this is really part of the regular work. And if you're lucky enough, and if you can really go out, which is not easy in Iraq, and get to start to touch and smell and feel the country that you're in, which again for security reasons is not always easy, then of course you also try to interact with the communities themselves, and all of this is in recognition of the important role these communities have, no matter whether they are big or whether they are small. I mean, they are the shaping components of this society in very many ways, with regard to individual identity, with regard to communal identity, but also with regard to politics and economics. I've always observed, starting in Lebanon, for example, that there is a kind of agreement between those who rule the state and the leaders of religious communities. So you have to give something in for preserving the maneuvering space and action range of your community, and you have to make sure vis-a-vis your community yourself that the community really stays with you. So there is interaction with a specific purpose, be it economic or political, on many levels. But going back to the identity issue, which is really the most important one. We have all been saying for many years, we've seen that especially people belonging to certain religious minorities are leaving this region, and we all say this is a big shame and this shouldn't happen. And when we try to answer why is that so, why is it a shame, then I think different answers come to mind. We as diplomats and as European Union, of course, we do not put religious identity at the forefront of our mind when we talk about things. We look more in terms of, we have a rights-based approach. We look at the issue of citizenship. So there is the fundamental issue of having a right as a person, the right to exist and to be and to live your life free from want or free of course. Becoming more specific, it is about the freedom to practice your religion, and to exercise life the way that you do want to exercise it. But there's also a level which is more, I think, about a common good. And that relates to the question, why is it a shame that this region is gradually being emptied of representatives of specific religious groups and minorities? There is a common good in all these groups being present, because they make up what is yet another value, that is diversity. And the way that different religious communities, when they live side by side with each other and manage to do so peacefully, also on the economic and political level, then of course one community impacts the life and the vision and the approaches of others as well. This is something that I have been taught in Lebanon, where from both sides people have told me, we as Christians, we were shaped in our outlook on the world by our Muslim neighbors, and our Muslim neighbors, or a Muslim said to me, we were very much shaped in our view of our own religion, how we practice it, by our Christian neighbors. So all of them being there produces something new and something very important and valuable. And I think this is the destiny of this region, which for the entire history has been between different worlds, let's say between the Roman and the Persian world, between the Byzantine and the Arab world, etc., etc. And all of this is about to change. And recently there are even more changes, and Iraq is a good example for this, when in many places we are faced with new realities that affect those who have been there before or those who have remained, and that the whole social sphere and the political sphere is shaped by these new realities. And this can only be overcome by an approach that we are really trying to take as European Union in Iraq, by highlighting the notion of citizenship. So again, this may not really be in the in the way that this seminar approaches the topic, but we think that there lies value and that there's a real contribution in helping communities, and amongst them religious communities, to exist side by side by stressing and building their citizenship. And that is certainly something that is needed in Iraq. And a lot of our activities and projects are actually geared towards that, and of course also geared towards creating understanding between these groups. Zainab, I understand, is from the Al Amal Association, so she is much more qualified than me to talk about this wonderful project Hiwaruna that we have and that we implement through them, and we try to do this on very many levels. There are one or two more issues about religious minorities, but I think we come to this later on. So what I want to stress at this moment is really a rights-based approach and underlining the notion of citizenship and bringing this to people's mind as one aspect of identity, not forgetting and not ignoring what we in the West sometimes tend to do, that that people in fact can have multiple identities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And actually in the previous session, Kamran Parlani was talking about this idea that the youth of Iraq are looking much more towards an Iraqi identity and away from necessarily just purely sectarian identity. So there's great overlap there. Ambassador, I would love to stay with you for a minute and focus on this more regional experience that you have. You spent a lot of time in the region, and notably you were German ambassador to Lebanon and currently now the EU ambassador to Iraq. Could you maybe share, I mean, we don't have a huge amount of time, so just one or two points where you see some overlaps maybe in the Lebanese and Iraqi situation, or where you see some very significant differences?
I think this, I mean, this is generalizing, of course, and to the extent that this is possible, I would say the societal fabric strikes me as being very much comparable, where again, religious identity is a very forging and an extremely important identity in many ways and on many levels, which doesn't include a national identity, which doesn't exclude a national identity, which doesn't exclude an ethnic identity if needed. But times of crisis, of course, always show what identity in the end pops up to the surface, and what is the one that is really the innermost and the one that goes away last, and maybe it is a religious identity. There are differences, of course. Iraq has gone through so much turmoil over the last 30 years, whereas Lebanon's last big turmoils ended in 1990, and I think the Lebanese have gone a long way since then. And despite the fact that both countries are multifaceted, multi-confessional, multi-ethnical, and of course we should include Syria in this as well, Lebanon is peculiar insofar as, for some reason or another, the distribution between the main groups, and of course there are 18 recognized religious groups in Lebanon, but the main ones, the three ones, Shia Muslims, Sunni Muslims, and Christians, are more or less equally divided, which I think has somehow positively coerced the country into a modus vivendi between all these groups, which is a balance that can be shaken, and people try to shake it all the time, and outside powers sometimes shake it, but it is somehow ingrained in Lebanese society, whereas the distribution in Iraq is altogether more uneven, and I think that makes the country more prone to conflict. I've recently read a study that's professes to say that religious identity is on the decline in Iraq. That is not necessarily my feeling, but then of course, unfortunately, I don't get out sufficiently and meet sufficient number of people to test this. Whether this is being replaced by a national identity or return to a national identity that may have existed in the 1950s, I can't really say. Someone who's very knowledgeable recently said to me that people in Iraq, they have a belonging. They have a clear sense of belonging to the land, and when I say land, I mean land. So it's climate, it's geography, it's what the land offers you in terms of agriculture, etc. The river, of course. Let's not forget that Iraq is a country culturally dominated by its rivers, just as much as Egypt is, but not really an identity that is national. When you don't have this and you have all these various groups, of course they all tend to gravitate into different directions. And if you impose, if you look at the new realities that I was referring to after 2003, with many new actors coming up, then the picture indeed becomes very bleak and very very disturbing. Even one example is the Sinjar region, and I suppose that you will have talked a lot about Sinjar. We know the disaster that has befallen Sinjar in 2013, 2014, the flight and the ensuing plight, horrible plight of the Yazidis, and then there is this discussion about their return. But it seems to me that there will never be a return to what things were like before, because in the meantime, those new realities, various militias, be they PMF groups, be they Kurdish groups, be they PKK, etc., they are new players there. They dominate the game, and everything that is happening there in this region will really now depend on what they are doing. And this, of course, will affect the fate of those who regard this as their homeland. And from there follows the question: will there ever and can there ever be a return to the status quo ante? And I'm very, very doubtful there, but I can't offer any alternatives as well.
Well, thank you for offering those insights, but also for raising some questions. We've had a very active audience throughout this workshop, so I'm sure there'll be some perspectives there, as probably from our panelists. I would like to now bring Stefan back to ask him about faith-based organizations, and some, out of your perspective, you haven't just worked with one, but with several faith-based entities, including World Vision and Malteser International. What do you see as the advantages of faith-based organization in the development sector in Iraq, and what are maybe some of the disadvantages?
I think it's not only in Iraq, but in general, coming from from Europe, there is this perception that okay, faith is something that is dwindling, but all over the world, organizations and people and structures are very much used and linked to their beliefs and to their religion. And even in Europe, I'd say what is changing is the role that the organized churches, let's say it that way, are playing. But faith in looking for something, for someone beyond the human being is still very valid. That means that coming and living, coming with a faith-based organization into the rest of the world, it's much easier for people to relate. I remember when there was a big earthquake in Bam in Iran, quite some years ago already, the Iranian government welcomed faith-based organizations like World Vision because they say, okay, we understand how you work, and they have very big difficulties to really understand the kind of secular world that in Europe is so common. So I would say one of the big advantages is that you have an easy linkage to the world and to the feeling and to the understanding of most of the population of the world, which is in the south. And the other aspect that I would want to stress, if you work and relate to faith groups in the different countries, the churches or the mosques, they know their people. They have a very solid understanding about who is in need, what are the requirements, what are the realities that people live in, and they can be, if they're allowed to be, really good translators and interpreters to say what's needed, how do we adjust, how do we need to adapt things. If I just look back to the experience in the Nineveh return program and the important role that religious actors had in helping understand what expectations are from the people that we want to serve. No? So this is something where faith-based organizations have a much easier understanding. Obviously, in the situation where faith is kind of instrumentalized and for fighting against each other, like it has been through ISIS, through fanatic people that misuse holy scriptures in order to get their ideas through. You need obviously to be careful. And the other aspect that has come out and has been already mentioned is that there are differences between age groups, I'd say. We have heard that especially for the young people, this is the role of faith and their belief, and more than that, probably the role of their structures, the churches or the mosques, is changing, and they are looking for different ways of engaging. And in this sense, probably the advantage of being a faith-based organization dwindles compared to others. But it's still something that is very relevant. Obviously, with there is as well, there are downsides to it to a certain degree, because most of these structured religions, they have a very patriarchal system, and taking adequately into account the need of women in emergencies, the special situations and the risks that they are facing, sometimes is not as well, is not as easy, because these people very often have been living in their kind of very patriarchal structure, and this is something where we need to be open and intentional in order to kind of mitigate against it.
Thank you, Stefan, for that nuanced perspective. Zainab, you work for a local consultancy. You already explained the identity is quite complicated. As I understand, it is not a faith-based organization. I'd love to hear from your experience. Is there any difference between how religious, non-religious organizations approach development or engage with religious communities? And also, if you have a minute, is there a difference between how local and international organizations approach development and religious?
Thank you, Sarah. Sometimes it's before, like, we talk about the approach, I think like there are also different elements which is define their own, like before they start to design their approach, which is their own mandate and their own strategies in addition to their own mandate in their own intervention. And sometimes there are a few limitations, which is how they will be perceived by the perception of the community / acceptance. So sometimes that would be a limitation, and sometimes this is no more as an opportunity, because it's about access, and it's about engagement, and it's about more networking. So I think this is what even started to be done or established additionally to the, I would say, to the primarily conflict assessment by many actors, whether both category you mentioned, or like people encouraging everyone to work in such complex context to do this as additionally, which is to do the perception over what a specific the community are expecting from which actors, what will be the trust relation towards which international community, against which examples, and based on what evidence they would trust that actor over the other one, because that will show ahead whether their own approach will be successful, because that will be defined by the acceptance by the community, by positive engagement, and whether that approach will be really matching and the exact best approach, or they need to really adapt or like redesign it ahead. And I will give as an example. So recently, as I like the example about the disputed territories, it showed us really impressive divided about the acceptance about the UN International or the UN communities, about who've been supporting the disputed territories, who've been not, who they do trust as the third party, as the negotiating party, who would they trust as the one who will play the role of monitoring the process of applying a shared governance framework, who would be the one will communicate with the community to address their own needs. And it showed a like really diverse map of the people they do trust, but they are still trusting the international rather than the national. But they do still see that the voice of the community is still needed, and it's need to be always engaged with all the processes. So it's something as an advice being provided for the international community, and they provided as an example as Sinjar agreement. For many political reasons, that the approach of getting the community consultation before drafting the elements or the key elements of Sinjar agreements between both governments wasn't clear enough or even fair enough yet for the community, and it's been addressed as one of the risk factor halting now the process of the implementation or satisfying the community that is still responding to the needs. And why is that? It said it wasn't really a structured approach of in considering the community voice of what they want. But when you talk with the political parties, they say yes, but sometimes deeply consultation with the community might do harm to create higher expectation before even doing this on the national level, political level. So it's kind of like you need to check what might be approach of more holistic one that is responding to different needs with really different interests. And you know, like whether even the election or not, whether even like within one single community, they have different needs and different affiliation, but still how you have this all over pictures that is still it's responding to different needs. Additionally, is that what we notice is that last year during response of the COVID, so I need just to step about away from the political example to the more community one. Responding during COVID is that faith-based organization and the development wasn't like really equally able to respond as many elements. So the faith-based organization, the national and the international, was more, as Mr. Stephen mentioned, was more acceptable. They felt like the community, this is now their role. They need, because they listen to us more. It's not about very challenging or complex development program. It's about basic need, and those organizations should understand this. It's not about designing a 3 months project development and the framework of observing. They see that this organization should apply an immediate intervention, immediate response, additionally to the volunteer and community groups. What we notice is that it's being perceived differently in different governorates. It depends on the power of the youth and the youth group, and it's also on which extent that moment is the belief and the faith of that youth group are standing now. And it will define their own action, whether they would like to cooperate or they might do not trust that organization. So they will work in parallel, but in isolation way, not particularly or necessarily cooperating with each other. And that's not the problem or the issue or mistake in the approach of those organizations, rather than it's the experience and the accumulative experience those youth group have been through, where they decided not to be defined by any faith or by any religious, because they feel this might lead to something they don't want to impress, which is the identity on nationality more, or as more as a human being, not to be titled or defined by specific religions, where they feel this will provide them more freedom of access and more freedom of not being stigmatized by specific identity by other communities. As Sir Stephen said, it's an advantage and disadvantage, and it's always how to turn the coin of the disadvantages into more positive for our own interest. Over to you, Sarah. Apology if it's taken long.
Thank you, Zainab. But I would love to continue on this train of thought. You're, on the one hand, pointing out people don't necessarily want to be forced into categories. On the other hand, this is how donors have to think in many cases. So, Stefan, I have a tricky question for you. And this was a question I know that underlay the whole Nineveh program. And yesterday, there were some quite critical questions in this direction. You have, on the one hand, the humanitarian imperative, saying that we must serve those most in need. And yet, in the case of Iraq, you have where whole populations have been affected by the conflict, even if certain minorities were the target. You do have the dilemma that some minority groups, such as the Christians, have been given more assistance than others on the basis of them being minorities, even if they're not necessarily the most in need, according to humanitarian criteria. So I hope I've explained this dilemma of the humanitarian imperative versus protecting and supporting minorities. Could you maybe respond to this problem a little bit?
Yeah, and as you said, this is a tricky one. Because, well, let's start with the principles, no? Because humanitarian assistance is intended to save life. And so we have different moments of interventions in different situations. Obviously, whatever is done needs to follow the humanitarian principles, which is humanity, impartiality, neutrality, and independence, in order to ensure that we are doing no harm. The role and the work of the reconstruction that is going on and that needs to go on in Iraq, in the Nineveh Plains, in Sinjar, and in so many other places, obviously needs to take into account the different realities and the history as well, because the question of how do we define need comes into play in a very significant way. Is need only cash? Or do we have to factor in the question of ongoing persecution? How do we factor into the question, the aspect of diversity, as Ambassador Huth said? How do we factor into the equation that the young people, the youth in general, is in a different, at a different moment, and that even the impact of ISIS on the religious identity of different groups has had different impact. So if we start working, and when we started working, we had to look into how do we define need. We were not in the immediate aftermath of ensuring that people got fed and survived. But how do we then factor in different aspects? How can we as well, in a quick way, respond? So here comes into play as well that, for example, the structure and the organization of the different ethno-religious group is quite different. While the Christians are through the churches, well organized and international structured, we have a lot of other groups that do not have these relationships. And yet in the programs, what we try to do is to make sure that we do not only work with one group, because that would have done probably harm, but we had been reconstructing houses of Christians, of Shabak, of Kakai, of Sunni. So in order to make sure that there is a future and a possibility of working together, but without doubt, the challenge is always with limited resources, where do you set priorities and how do you set priorities? So, so the question of the reconstruction phase is in understanding on the one hand, well, how do you define need? Is need only in economic terms, or do you have to factor in history? Do you have to factor in question of diversity and so on? And how do you ensure in whatever you do and whatever we did that it fits into the broader picture? Because it's not only the program that one organization is implementing, but how do you coordinate and collaborate through the cluster with other organizations? And how do you make sure that people and groups do not fall through the cracks? So what happened, for example, that we started doing a social cohesion program in an area where we did not have any other intervention, but a partner of us mentioned and explained to us that there was need for working with the youth and for the youth and providing opportunities, because yeah, tension was building up. So if you engage, you need to kind of balance a lot of different aspects at the same time, and you need to ensure that you do this in a well-structured and organized and coordinated way, because no one organization will ever have the possibility to solve everything or to do to bring in enough money to reconstruct what had been destroyed over this time.
Thank you, Stefan, for tackling a very big issue that that a lot of people have very strong views on as well. I'm aware of the time, so I would like to come to talk with you a little bit about religious actors. Ambassador Huth, I'd like to call on you again. The Pope recently visited Iraq, and this was a very major visit for the country, and I believe not just for the Christians, but for many other ethnic and religious groups as well. Maybe you could share with us a bit how you experienced this visit, and also what the visit of the Pope meant from a political and diplomatic perspective.
Thank you, with pleasure. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay. With pleasure. Before doing this, I just wanted to share, I had a thought while listening to the discussion, and insofar as the discussion very much revolves around the question of identity, it occurred to me that, of course, for many people, the notion of citizenship is per se not a desirable one. It's not one that gives them something right away in the absence of a state that clearly doesn't provide. And then people come from a religious community which for hundreds of years has provided a stable environment, a cosmos that defines their lives in very many ways, so that both the community in itself is a stable thing, but life in that community is a stable thing. And when that goes away and you find yourself scattered over the land, with citizenship offering no refuge, I think that illustrates very much the hardship of that situation. It makes me reflect a little bit again on the importance of religious identity and of having intact communities. That's just a takeaway from what I've listened to. As to the Pope's visit, yes, it was fantastic. It was an enormous moral boost for the whole country. As far as I know, a papal visit to Iraq had been planned for a long time. The Pope's predecessor, Benedict XVI, already intended to come to Iraq, and I think that had to do with this idea of doing an interreligious gathering in Ur and maybe also going from Ur to Jerusalem. I think that was the idea at the time. A kind of grand scheme by which that would encompass the three major religions of the region, and that's a visit that would never manifest. But Pope Francis, I think, realized the significance of such a visit. I think it was a personal desire of his, despite all warnings, COVID-related, security-related, and I can share with you that until a week before the visit, I wasn't sure whether it might not be cancelled at the end, because COVID numbers here were spiking. There were also some militia attacks in Erbil, etc. So from my perspective, it looked actually quite bleak. And the fact that he came, and despite his own health problems, of course, showed the importance that he gave to this visit. And I think people clearly understood this. Now, from the Vatican's perspective, or let's say, I know that, of course, Christian leaders in this region here, mostly Catholic ones, but I suppose Christians as a whole, they were had been looking forward to such a visit for a long time. They saw this as one of the prerequisites to credibly send out a message for the need of return, because again, Syria, Iraq, almost or to a large extent depleted, and therefore it was important for the Pope to spread this message by coming here and then by saying it, that people should come back and they should not forget their land. And I think it is a message that was addressed as much to Syria as it was addressed to Iraq, and that was well understood. I think he also made it clear that as a world leader, he is a world leader who's 84 years, who doesn't shy the hardship of undertaking such a visit, that he wants to set an example to others to say, do not forget this country. There are not many visits taking place to Iraq right now, and Iraq has the unfortunate capacity and maybe even history of falling a little bit into the cracks. If you look at the actual situation on the level of international politics, people look at Iran, people look at Syria. And Iraq, of course, is a country that bears very much the brunt and the consequences of what's going on regionally. But again, the focus is a little bit elsewhere. And I think the Pope's visit also made it clear Iraq has tremendous positive potential, also relating to the diversity of the social fabric of its inhabitants, to the role it can play between regional countries. And it has horrible negative potential if it collapses, if the actual situation goes on both internally and regionally. Of course, it will again be a source of destruction, terrorism, and migration, and all of this has to be taken into account. So there's something for everybody to take away from the Pope's visit. His meeting with Ayatollah Sistani sent a clear message to the Muslim world, and in this case to the Shia world, because he had met with the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, Ahmad Tayyib, already some years ago. So this complements the outreach to Muslim leaders, and it was noted. So those were a few very, very joyful days in Iraq, and I think that joy spread from Christian communities to all over the country. There were very few negative comments. There were no security incidents, and I would just hope that this spirit lasts a little bit and can provoke and move something in this country. For example, the insight that people have to come together. I'm going back again to citizenship and the broader issues. The reformulation of a social contract is important to us. We like the idea of a national dialogue. It was interesting to see that the Prime Minister immediately after the visit of the Pope, or the Pope has just left by plane, articulated the proposal for a national dialogue in Iraq. And I hope that this would come. This is something that this country needs. Whether it is doable is another matter. But return of Christians, to come to this specific desire of the Catholic Church, the message is here, but is the situation of the ground conducive to this, where the question is not so much anymore whether religious communities can live again side by side with each other as they used to be in the past, or in an idealized past. And of course, the past wasn't always sunny. I see a situation where this togetherness or non-togetherness is more and more determined by a fight for scarce resources and by a logic that says one group can only exist at the expense of others. And that again makes it very, very hard. So even if people return, they love their land and they want to return, they left this country as refugees, they know what they can contribute, but they need to find a livelihood, they need to find jobs, they need to find security, and we are still unfortunately very, very far from that. But altogether, the Pope's message was incredibly important, and I think you need 10 Western foreign ministers to make up or to be as significant as this one single visit.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Huth. And to your comment about community, Mona Hein gave a presentation yesterday, which might be interesting for you, her paper looking at the idea of community, not just as a physical structure, but also as more than a physical structure, an emotional structure, a psychological structure. I'm aware that we have gone slightly over time and also that a few people want to ask questions. So I would love to get Zainab's feedback about the visit of the Pope, and then I think we'll open the floor for a few questions, and I will let us be guided by Eckhart's timekeeping in that regard. So please, Zainab, give us some impressions of the Pope's visit from your.
Thank you. I think it's exactly what Sir Martin explained. It was, I would say, exactly as any citizen described it. It was a historical moment. I mean, even from the preparation, from the announcement, I mean, the announcement even of the arrival, and regardless how like the reality was really disappointed, is that how come the government can really make those arrangements and quick, I would say, clean streets, clean welcoming entrance, and only because the visit, and they blamed immediately the government that we will ask, like they made it even as diplomatic, unique, not joke, but really as a black joke against the government, that we will ask the Pope to visit us monthly base, because if that's what does require from the government to really not rehabilitate, but at least to fix things that doesn't require time and money, it's only just require the Pope visit, then we will ask him, like, we don't have anything in our mind, just to please make it more frequent so we can see more flourishing to our country. But if I would say on the reality, I think it was really surprising to me that even non-Christian were more happy of having this visit, because they see it not, it was addressed to special religious. It came for Iraq, and the diversity message and the forgiveness and the quietness, and how he managed to make even the balance about announcing his own agenda, and how he paid the visit and even inviting all the minorities, really key religious leaders and representatives. So what was really unite, even the social media were reflecting everything is about, like, this is the songs about different religions, this is the customs, and this is the culture, and this is the heritage, and this is the gifts, the people, the small, simple income single individuals who've been preparing different gifts, but really remarkable, unique gifts, is that it's not about he's bringing something to Iraq. We want also to give him and to send him a message, is that this is the country of the diversity and forgiveness, and they hoped that he will speak on their behalf really a good message. And they were really wanted, and this is what I heard from a really key person, and I would say in the political environment, is that everyone was so eager to know what was behind the scene, his message to Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani, because there were no media coverage, and there were no one allowed to enter that room, only like the his person, like and then apparently something being sneaked out about this kind of messages, that tell me, what do you think, which was the question addressed by the Pope. And I don't know, because I wasn't there, but it's kind of like people would like to be convinced that was the real message, is that the response was like, it's really disappointing about the political here currently doing their job. So it's like they felt relieved. Oh, now he knows the truth. You know, like the simple Iraqi citizens, like they wanted to know that the Pope will know that the reality is still fragile, and the reality is they still need more I wouldn't say only visit, but maybe more lobby, more transferring those messages to more broad. So they felt like relieved, whether that was the truth or not, that he knew, and like he will not be, I would say, only inspired and impressed by only the positive lenses and the image he will see, but he will know that also there is more painful realities behind it. And I think that was a reflection. One of my colleagues who is living in Erbil, he was, I think he's in his mid 40. He said, I was waiting in Ankawa street when we hear that he will walk in that street. And he said, everyone, regardless, all minorities, all ethnics, they were really emotionally, they cannot believe. Like that was really a moment that when they describe it, you feel it's a movie. And I think that's why all Iraqis really cherish that moment. And I think that's where, as Mr. Martin said, is that maybe this is the momentum, that if there is a specific leadership would you really use to advance and to build on that moment where, you know, like they really forget who we are. It's about we are Iraqis. So inshallah soon. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks so much, Zainab, for those very inspirational insights. I am going to take 3 questions now, and I would ask those who are going to ask the question, please to keep it brief because we have gone over time. And also to make clear if you have a specific panelist that you would like to address your question to. It's not necessarily, maybe it's just a general question. The first question goes to Ms. Aida Ahmed, who wrote in the chat that she has a question. Over to you.
مرحبا. طبعا أحب أسأل سعادة السفير حول تساؤله حول لماذا هجرت، وأكد وأثني على ما قال أن الوطن هو المكان اللي يوفر لنا لقمة العيش والكرامة والأمن للإنسان والشعور بالأمان، فإذا فقط أكيد. لكن ألا تعتقد سيادة السفير أن يعني وصول أحزاب الإسلام السياسي ولا سيما في العراق، ويمكن يشاطرنا لبنان في بعض الظروف تتشابه مع العراق، أحزاب الإسلام السياسي هي من أضعفت الهوية سواء الدينية أو الهوية الوطنية، وكذلك عمل المؤسسات الدينية بشكل غير منفصل عن الحكومة. فالحكومة أيضاً يحتاج إلى إعادة ميكانيزم هذه الحكومة وآليات عملها من حيث الحكم الرشيد والشفافية والمساءلة وسيادة القانون. كل هذه العوامل مهمة، يعني لا تعتقد أنها شيء مهم؟ ما هي جهودكم كانت في هذا المجال؟ بالنسبة لستيفان، أحب أن أسأله، هل من الضروري أن أعرف كل تعاليم الدين المسيحي أو اليهودي لكي لا تكون هناك نقاط ضعف يمكن من خلالها التلاعب بأفكاري ضد هذه الطوائف، أم أن نشر الثقافة ونشر الحب ليس من الضروري أن أعرف كل تعاليم لخصوصيات لكل دين له خصوصياته، بل بالعكس يمكن التعرف على الخصوصيات العميقة والمفصلة في الأديان ممكن أن تخلق التناحر والتنافر. أنا حسب اعتقادي، ألا تعتقد أنه مجرد نشر الثقافة وثقافة التسامح وبناء دولة مواطنة والاهتمام بالمستويات التعليم الديني من الأسرة ومن ثم المجتمع والمدرسة والمؤسسات الدينية، أن نفرق في مستويات التعليم في هذه المجالات من الأسرة؟ هل هي الخطر في التعليم داخل الأسرة أم في المدرسة أم في المجتمع أم المؤسسات الدينية والتي تسيطر عليها الحكومة، يعني من خلال الكنائس أو الجوامع أو المعابد إلى آخره؟ هل هذا الخطاب الديني هو الأخطر في أي مجال حتى نستطيع كيف نتعامل معه؟ أنا أعتقد ليس من الضروري أن نتعرف على كل ما يتعلق بالديانة المسيحية أو اليهودية أو حتى الديانة الإسلامية، لا أعرف كل تفاصيل، مع أني مسلمة لا أريد أن أعرف كل تفاصيل متعلقة بالدين الإسلامي. أنا يهمني الجانب الأخلاقي في التعامل مع الآخرين. وشكرا على كل الجهود التي تبذل من أجل تحقيق العدالة والمساواة والتنمية المستدامة في العالم. شكرا لكم وشكرا جزيلا.
Thank you, Ms. Aida. Just to the panelists and other questions, please a little bit more brief so we give more people the opportunity. After you, Ambassador Huth.
To answer, okay, I had no translation, but I hope I picked it up more or less correctly. I very much sympathized with the question in which it was asked, because it really again points to the dire situation that comes when the old context is not there anymore and a new scary context imposes itself. Not only that the own environment is gone, but as the question seemed to imply, new forces or old are dominant, or existing forces become over dominant. I think all of this relates a little bit to this question of social contract of Iraqis now, insofar as we are talking about Iraq. And this relationship and a social contract implies not only the relationship between all citizens and all groups and religious groups and non-religious groups, but it also touches upon the relationship between the state and the citizen. These things must be clear, and this relationship, of course, is a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street. We have seen since October 2019 demonstrations in Iraq, all very understandable due to the socio-economic situation this country was undergoing, but we've also seen very many demonstrators who, for example, continue to ask for government employment, because this is the practice in this country. If you want to employ people, you give them government jobs, and of course they end up being completely unproductive. The state's resources are wasted on these salaries, which is a huge problem in Iraq. And I'm saying this because in the context of the social contract and the definition of a good and stable relationship between the state and its citizens, it's not only a state that has to provide through effective institutions and has to work at the service of the citizens also must see and must be ready to be productive and to produce and to procure their share to the joint undertaking. Another question that I ask myself is, when we talk about a new social contract, and these discussions can in fact take place through a national dialogue, can there be a segment of this exercise or dialogue that would ask the question of how much secularism would be good and would be agreeable and would be acceptable in Iraq, without disturbing too much the fabric of society and the way of life of Iraqis, but just as a matter of necessity to say there are certain things from which we have to depart in order to come together and again reinforce this identity of Iraqis, of being citizens, of all being in one boat, and from there we can go on. Just my thoughts on this question, as much as I think I have understood it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain a little bit more in detail what I've been thinking of. I fully agree that there is no need to understand all the religions in detail and be an expert in the different religions. I do believe that number one, in all religions, you have aspects like welcoming the other. It's about caring about the women and orphans. And there are a lot of commonalities. And if you know about your own religion, you can more easily detect these commonalities in the other religions. No? There are organizations like Religions for Peace that are globally organized and that are very intentionally highlighting those aspects where the different religions and the different beliefs coincide, which is about living together with respect and harmony and accepting the other the way he or she is. So I think this is something when I talk about religious literacy and the importance, it's about well understanding what are the principles of your own religion. And that helps you then to engage with the other one in a respectful way and to avoid to fall into certain traps, no? Because there are so many preconcepts about what the Yazidis believe or what the Christians believe or what the Sunni and so on. So it's about developing respect and understanding about these different aspects, no? As a matter of fact, I do believe as well that this is much easier under the concept of citizenship, about rule of law. This is where we have heard already that especially the young people the younger generations are looking to this, so not to be identified so much because I have a certain background, but I am a citizen of a place that is called Iraq. And there are aspects that can then help to create unity. Let me just one aspect on the hope of the Pope to motivate people to come back. Whenever I talked in my travel to Iraq to young people, regardless who it was, they all have been looking outside for opportunities. I think the question of a country where you can have a future, where you can aspire of having family, having a decent life, is so important as it relates to the question of migration, that that's regardless if it's one or the other group. As long as the young people do not see hope and future in their own country, as long as they don't see opportunities and kind of basic things working, it will be very difficult to stop this because people will keep looking for a better life wherever it is.
Thank you very much, Stefan. The next question comes from Dr. Abdul Nasser. Dr. Nasser.
Yes, I tried to, yeah. أول شيء شكرا على هيدي السماح لي أجي أعمل تعليقين أو 3 تعليقات بشكل سريع. أول شيء بدي أشكر السيد ستيفان لأن فعلا بذكره لموضوع برنامج العودة لدينا و اتضح لي أو حسيت بمكان إنه في فهم صحيح وعميق طبيعة السياق بشكل واضح. موضوع جهل الآخر أو معرفة الآخر طبعا موضوع أساسي ببناء المواطنة، والآخر ممكن يكون منتمي لجماعة دينية وممكن لا، فضروري إزالة هاي الهواجس. وأنا بعرضي قبل الجلسة الختامية هيدي ذكرت إنه ترك الفراغ بهذا المحل، ترك الفراغ بموضوع ترك الآخر مجهل عند الجماعات بيترك المجال للناس الغير مختصين يعبوا هذا الفراغ ويحطوا أفكارهم مثل داعش وغير داعش. فنحن بس نترك هذا الفراغ أكيد هذا ناهيك عن موضوع الصور المنمطة والأفكار المسبقة، فنحن عم نترك لهم هيدا المجال. عندي نقطة ثانية بس إذا سمحتوا لي، موضوع طرح الهجرة والتركيز على هجرة المسيحيين. حكما يجب في السياق الشرق أوسطي أو سياق المنطقة اللي عم نحكي فيها نحن مينا ريجن، يجب المحافظة على التنوع الموجود فيه مثل ما تفضل السفير، ولكن وعودة المسيحيين وغيرها، ولكن هذا منه هاجس وحيد، وهذا سمعتها بهود اليومين من أكثر من حدا من الباحثين والمتحدثين من العراق. الموضوع منه فقط عودة أو هجرة المسيحيين، يعني حتى المسلمين، حتى كل المنتمين لكل الطوائف يجوزهم اليوم، مش بس بالعراق كمان بلبنان. الأردن اليوم فيها نوع من الاستقرار، نوع ما أمني واستقرار. كمان الشباب هونيك بتسألهم بيقولوا لك انه نحن بحاجه للسفر وللهجره، خاصه على الدول اللي فيها استقرار او اللي فيها ازدهار. المخيف بطرح الموضوع بهالطريقه انا برايي هو استعمال هذا الخطاب بطريقه استقطابيه سياسيه او دينيه. الخوف، خلق هواجس، فبضل في مثل خيط رفيع بين المحافظة على المسيحيين والمحافظة على التنوع في هذا الشرق، وبين استغلال هذا الخطاب في الخطاب الاستقطابي أو خطاب الكراهية. نقطة أخيرة حأختم فيها إذا سمحتوا لي بموضوع المواطنة والهوية برضو اللي طرحه سعادة السفير. أكيد في عدد من من الهويات والانتماءات لكل شخص. أنا تقديري الخطأ اللي صار في دول المنطقة بالمينا ريجن، الخطأ اللي صار انه اسقطت المفاهيم، مفهوم المواطنة اسقط اسقاطا على رؤوس الناس دون ترتيبات اجرائيه ودون سياقات تاريخيه جعلت تطور مفهوم المواطنة يوصل تقدر تستوعبه الناس. عشان هيك موضوع الحوار، وخاصة الحوار الديني أو أي حوار آخر، ولكن نحن نتحدث عن الحوار الديني، أهميته بأنه اللحظة اللي يسقط فيها أو ينتزع عن المواطن ثقل الأنظمة والقوانين، بهيدي اللحظة لا يبقى لنا يعني ما بيعود في رابط للمواطنة، ما بيعود في أنظمة وقوانين تمنعني أن أتعدى أو أظلم جاري أو المنتمي للدين الآخر أو للفكر الآخر أو للحزب الآخر. بهيدي اللحظة لا يعود يبقى لدينا سوى القيم الإنسانية اللي لازم تكون معززة. يعني اللحظة اللي بيسقط فيها القانون كقانون سلطة ودولة، بصير التربية على وتعزيز مفهوم القيم اللي هي قيم بدها تكون إنسانية ودينية وحتى سياسية بنفس الوقت. بهذه اللحظة بيكون هيدا الوازع، هذا الوازع هو اللي بيمنح.
We very much running.
شكرا لكم عفوا على الإطالة.
I think there was not necessarily just one person who was the question or the comment was directed at. So if you would all like to make a brief response, then we will come to our final question. Ambassador Huth, your microphone is unmuted, so maybe you would like to begin.
Yeah, again, I had no translation. Eka tried to help me, but we didn't succeed. No, these are very pertinent comments, and I suppose they were coming from Lebanon, so all fully understood. I just want to point out that in fact, a dialogue of religions or between religions is one thing. Reconciliation is very often being addressed as another form of dialogue, and reconciliation, of course, looks at things at the past and how to deal with this, and then you get into issues of transitional justice, etc. And the national dialogue is something, again, completely different and all-encompassing, and maybe looks more at the future. In Iraq, I think it is the last one that is most needed. I think a dialogue of religions has its limits. It tends to be very often then a dialogue of religious leaders, stressing commonalities, which is fine, but then you leave the problematic issues very often outside. And as the speaker, I think, has already said, or it was in one of the comments, many young people nowadays, they also feel a little bit trapped within their religion, and they actually, this is no wonder in a globalized and digitalized world, they feel the urge to break out from the confines of their religion, and therefore they're actively seeking something new. And for them, the religious cosmos is not their future. And that's just another reason why addressing these issues on the level of citizenship is so important. But I'm sure I haven't got all the aspects of the question, so I'll pass it on to the others who have received the translation.
Zainab, why don't you go ahead?
Thank you for really all those questions, and adding to the important point Dr. mentioned just now, and also for Mr. Martin. I think it's also very critical that sometimes when we see things might be the right things to do, whether as an approach or as a program, or even as maybe like the decision maker sees, it doesn't mean it's the same what the community needs. So I think one of the arguments we reached a few years ago is about that the Iraqi government should ask all the the European countries. Even like it was, as I recall, like it was really 3-4 years ago when there is a diplomatic delegation went to Sweden to like really ask to stop receiving more visas. But when you reach to hear the right stories, is that it's kind of like this is again their choice. This is their right decisions to decide their own destiny. And one of the arguments is they said, they asked me, Zainab, you should not encourage foreign migration. I'm saying, so my reply was that I'm not encouraging neither. I'm not encouraging to force people to face realities. It's not doing any good for their end, and there is no solution from their own lenses. And at the same time, I cannot encourage them, yalla, leave everything's behind your back and go to consider yourself as a migrant for the rest of your life. But it's their choice. Maybe our role is that to seek if there is any further support as what they call it, the last resort, or maybe additional solutions. Maybe is that we can provide the protection, because a lot of cases of illegal migration happen to Iraqis, and really sad stories, like people with their families and kids they lost in, and even people, as Dr. Abdel mentioned, they weren't minorities. They went to US, but they were like really went with the hope of like they got the amazing dream, and but they regretted at the end. So it's about maybe just to ask them is that really think it twice. What does it take? Do you have it? Is it legal? Do you have the protection? Do you have way back? Do you have people to support you? Because sometimes even those words people doesn't have it. Is that the discussion usually people in the fragile situation, they don't ask it because their lenses, their head doesn't listen to the sense of like really irrational question, because they have irrational situations. So I think it's also, yes, I agree with also Dr. Abdullah again, when the immigration is that, I think what we notice is that the Christian, they have someone to ask for them that it shouldn't be that case to continue, because they feel they shouldn't lose more people of their own community, whether it's been politicized or not. But what I notice is that when non-minorities travel, no one cares. It's kind of like I feel some figures, they relieved. Oh, we have less citizens to worry about now. I know it might sound a joke now, but this is sometimes it's what they feel, is that no one cares whether we traveled, whether we died in the middle, or whether we stayed, or who we are, or to belong to which religions. I know it might sound black, but I think on the other side, there are also people start to give up this idea. They started to shift their mind. If there is something we can do, let's give ourselves more chance, more additional year, just to try. And I think as I quote one on the messages of the bishop, so when we asked him, he said like, I've been trying to change in the last 12 years, but I give up now. So I told him, yes, it took 12 years to give up. Maybe we need to give more years people not to give up immediately after 3 to 5 years. Maybe because people who traveled even from Yazidi, they said, we are connected to our lands and we want to go back, to come back. And I think many examples you all are aware of. I think it's good to advocate for that while people are traveling and we cannot hold them longer than they cannot resist, or the people are planning or thinking to come back, is that what we can do is that to change something, at least when they came, is like when they will ask the people who stayed, really, you didn't do anything while we were there? So it might sound really soap opera, but I think this is what keeping people, is the hope. Is the hope that they can do something, even if it's not notable, but it's required time. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Zainab. And briefly from you, Stefan.
Yeah, the question of migration, just let us be mindful that the illegal migration is a big business. There is a lot of money that is made from people that want to immigrate, want to get to Europe. This is a business with amounts that are moved similar to the arms business. So we need to be aware that question of opportunity, of future possibilities of hope on the one side, and as well with a reality of lack of factual information about the situation, lack of information, and for the people that want to go and want to leave. So I think the question of being able to provide real factual information about what is possible, what is not possible, what the hardship is. Unfortunately, there is a communication, the people that communicate back that made it are the ones that made it. So the thousands and thousands of people that are trapped somewhere in between, they are not communicating back the same way. So there is this intrinsic situation that makes it very complicated. Probably one aspect, and I fully agree with what has been said on the need for finding a way forward and of reconciliation, of coming together. I think if we talk about dialogue of religions, we need to talk as well about the dialogue within the religion, because there is a divide between young and old. There is the difficulty sometimes to be able to engage with those who have been brainwashed to a certain degree, to help them to reflect and see and look at their past and on their beliefs in a different way. It's a tricky situation. It's not easy, but I think there is no way around if we want to have a future for people of the diverse faiths and realities that have been living in Iraq together for centuries, and hopefully will be living there and enjoying life in peace and harmony in the future again.
Thank you, Stefan, and thank you for all the very challenging questions. There's one more question that was in the chat. It's a quick one, not addressed to anyone in particular. With relation to the Pope's visit, are there any other regional religious leaders who might echo the Pope's message? Do any of you want to provide a reflection or an idea on that one?
If I may, the Pope's message is there, and I think it is constantly being reiterated by the Church, by other religious leaders as well. The significance was here in taking this message to Iraq and giving hope and saying this country is not a lost cause and this country should not be forgotten. So it was more an issue, I think, of the place. There is no lack of messaging. Of course, what we need now in Iraq is a willingness, and especially, but not exclusively, a willingness from religious leaders from all groups to take this message up and say, yes, we commit to this. We commit to the title of this visit, which I think was "We are all brothers." Actually, should have said "We are all brothers and sisters," which is just a very simple message, but let's start to practice it. So following up on it, I think, is more of a challenge than simply repeating the message.
Would any of the other panelists like to offer a comment on that? Okay, then I think that is all we have time for. Well, I mean, we are very much over time. So for that, I apologize, but it was such a great conversation with all of you. So before I hand over to Eckhard, I want to say 4 words of thanks. First of all, thank you so much to all of the panelists today. It was such an honor to be able to moderate all of you, and a really great learning opportunity for me, and I'm sure for the audience too, a great way to wrap up this workshop. I want to thank you, the audience, for bearing with us. I know we went a little over time, for your great questions in person and also in the chat. I want to thank so much the Research Program for Religious Communities and Sustainable Development for giving us all the opportunity to gather today and organizing this excellent workshop. And of course, I want to thank all of the support around this, the interpreters, all of the student supporters, all of the people working with the whole technology for making this possible. So from my side, a huge thank you to all of you. And I would like to hand back over to Dr. Eckhard Sonntag.
Thank you. A big thank you from me and the whole team, Sarah, to you for hosting this sublime last item on the agenda, which was a wonderful way of closing this very engaging workshop. Thank you, everybody, for your for your contributions. And it struck me how in many points throughout the program there were moments for further points of connections where half sentences like one should follow up or we might work together on. And this is very much our wish, that we stay in contact going forward. As I said in the opening remarks, there will be a conference in June, and our journal is coming up with the first issue, and the June conference will also be the inauguration moment for the international network on religious communities and sustainable development. And my colleague Inda could maybe put in the chat, yeah, she just did, all the relevant links for the website and the newsletter and Twitter. So please do keep in touch and have a very good rest of your day, and see you very, very soon. Thank you and bye-bye.